Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to comment just for a moment this morning on how terrible Matt sounded yesterday in his forecast video. I hope he's feeling a little bit better. Hope he stays home from work today, too, and just gets some rest. But it reminded me of a book I read. It's one of my favorite books. It's called The Wager. I hope some of you have read it. But in the book, I did learn something interesting about a phrase that Matt used yesterday, and I want to kick the video off today talking about it. He said he felt under the weather, right? That's a common phrase we all use. And I had no idea where that phrase came from until I read this book about this English warship called the Wager. And what's interesting is, I just want to point this out, I just noticed David Gran also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon. And if you've not read that book, if you enjoy history books, this is incredible book here about kind of the birth of the FBI and the Osage Native American tribe. Incredible book. Anyway, back to the Wager. The phrase "under the weather," I just thought you might like to hear this. Okay, so this is kind of what one of these boats looks like. And what I want to tell you is that the biggest deck on second to the deck on top, it's the first deck right below it here. Now, the first deck served a lot of purposes, but one of the big things was whenever the weather got terrible, you were told to get under the weather. And what it meant was you left the top deck and you went to the first deck, the largest deck on the ship. Now, if you remember, this was also a time where scurvy was extremely common. Of course, this was a deficiency in vitamins. And what would happen is if the ship ever came under, the attack of a disease rather than weather or a foreign adversary, they would turn the entire first deck into the kind of infirmary. And so you were told to go under the weather for two reasons. If there was bad weather, you went off the top deck to the first deck. Thus, you got under the weather. Or they also use the same phrase when everyone was sick, and they would just tell someone, get under the weather, which meant to go to the largest deck, below the main deck. So I don't know. I thought it was kind of neat. That's where the phrase comes from. Just a little bit of fun history here, and I highly, highly recommend this book. It's very, very good. All right, we now need to talk just a bit about what we witnessed yesterday with the landfall of Hurricane Melissa at Category 5 strength. And as you look at this image, this is from the Sentinel-2 satellite. And it's one of our very, very high-resolution satellites, and it caught a very rare glimpse of this hurricane. The satellite has a very narrow swath width. It's because it's super high resolution, but you could see through the stadium effect of these clouds all the way down to the ocean surface here. There were birds reported in the eye wall. Within the eye wall or in the eye. And remember that within the eye wall, we have our hottest conditions. This is why the hurricane works, how it works. And this particular hurricane reached its maximum potential. Dr. Kerry Emanuel is important for many different areas in atmospheric science in his research. But one of the things he determined or discovered through a lot of empirical evidence is that the hurricane's maximum potential is ultimately determined by the ocean temperatures. Now, all the environmental factors can take that potential away, but that was not the case with Hurricane Melissa. If you've not yet seen these, I want to play for you some of these videos that were put out by the Hurricane Hunter. I put kind of a compilation of them together as they flew through the eye wall of the hurricane. We did get several notices that they were doing kind of, I wouldn't call them aborted missions, but readjusted mission flights because the turbulence was too great at times. But this is what it looks like to fly into the eye of the hurricane. If you've been watching this on the news and keeping up with it, I'm sure you've seen these. But for those of you that haven't, I just wanted to show you what it looks like to be in this. Now, I've been on one of the Hurricane Hunters. I didn't fly in it in a hurricane. I've flown on it multiple times in a big research field campaign that was down in the Caribbean back in 2004 and 2005. And when you fly through these hurricanes, just so you understand, yes, it's extremely turbulent, but the trick I was told by some of the PIs, the principal investigators on the research flights I've been on, is that if you'd like to do this and not vomit, then continually eat small amounts. I don't know why, but I was on a very turbulent flight, multiple turbulent flights in the C-130 called the same one as a Hurricane Hunter. And if I just kept nibbling, I didn't get sick. So I just thought I'd share those stories with you this morning as we watch these incredible videos from the Hurricane Hunters. All right, where is it this morning? It is just going across Cuba. It has gone over the top of Jamaica. I have no idea yet the toll of the devastation there, and I'm sure we'll be getting more and more reports as time goes on. Now, of course, it's lost its structure. It's hit land twice now, and it is thankfully weakening as it goes forward. But it was still this morning, 115 mile-an-hour winds at Category 3 strength intensity, and is expected to move very close to Bermuda before it kind of clips parts very, very eastern parts of the Canadian Maritimes here, and then heads on off to to Europe, actually. In fact, over the last couple of days, a deep storm system is already going through Europe. It was one that dumped a ton of snow on pockets of Iceland as well. I would like to show you the Google forecast. I love this view of it just to kind of see where this is going. So this is using the European Ensemble, the European High Res, and some of their experimental models, including their GraphCast model. So this is a machine learning model. And we can see the forecast track of this system pretty coherent. I'm going back and forth here just over the next few days, getting us all the way out there from the 29th through the 3rd. And this will end up as a very deep low that is moving through the North Atlantic. And that's going to be critical to assess what this does to stir up the ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic, what it does to the overall jet stream pattern in the North Atlantic, which has been quite vigorous. So Melissa is doing what hurricanes do, which is just move heat, momentum out of the tropics into the subtropics and eventually into the northerly latitudes. So it definitely has an impact on global weather patterns. Now, along the way, these are the expected wave heights. This is significant wave height measured here in feet. And so there's Melissa when the model was initialized. And you can see we've already got large waves moving across the North Atlantic. But here's Melissa moving through the Bahamas later on in the day today, and then out to open ocean. We're talking 30 to 35 feet, 35-foot waves. And then it moves right over, as you see here, Bermuda. And then it's already being stirred up significantly from these deep lows in the North Atlantic. But this one's going to go in and aid with all of that. There's where the remnants of Melissa are. And then you can see about 5 days from now, Monday the 3rd, what's left of Melissa is here, according to the European model, and possibly just passing just north of the British Isles. Just to kind of show you what's going on in Europe, take a look at this 10-day forecast. The isobars, which are the contours, represent just how strong the winds are. And by the way, I wanted to mention this just so you have some idea. Speaking of intensity and winds, right now Melissa ranks second behind Hurricane Allen, which hit in 1980. Allen had 190 mile an hour winds. Melissa had 185. And Melissa is right there with the Labor Day hurricane of 1935, Gilbert of 88, Wilma of 2005, and Dorian of 2019. All of them had 185 mile an hour sustained winds. Now, we know that the wind gusts were considerably higher, but those are the sustained 1-minute winds. It's going to rank number 3 in terms of intensity, just to kind of give you some historic perspective here. That would be behind number 1, which is Hurricane Wilma in 2005 at 882 millibars, and then Gilbert in 1988, which was 888 millibars. Then you have Melissa at 892. Just incredible to think through that. But the remnants of it will be moving through Europe. Now, it's not this. This is the lead system that's already going through, just really stirring things up. Very strong winds, coastal rains, just front slashing through, parts of Europe. But we have to get out there. There's 5 days and beyond, and we'll start to see, Melissa's influence. Actually, I missed it. That's what's left of Melissa right there, going through, this part of the North Atlantic. Now, back home, this is kind of how things are shaping up. We continue to see deep troughs of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. We continue to see clippers. We're going to watch this one soon. And here's the deep low that's moving through the central U.S. and mid-south right now, and it has dragged a front all the way into the Gulf. And that's Melissa. Now, as we take a step up in the atmosphere, I just want to show you the mid-level winds. We're going to watch these quite a bit in the coming days, simply because, look at the size of this. Look at these waves. You can kind of get a trajectory of systems coming through the country, and I think that's going to be critical to when and where low-pressure systems are going to impact the United States. So let's dig in and talk about it. This morning, about 6:30 a.m. Central Time, we had the freeze and frost warnings that were behind the front that came through. I mean, the temperatures have already dropped off from where they were yesterday, 10 to 20 degrees from just yesterday morning. And then ahead, we have the wind issues. Red flag warning south, wind advisories to the east. And we've got some very, very strong winds coming through with this system, as you saw when I was down there at the lower levels of the atmosphere. There's 850 millibar winds. And here's the surface winds later on today. Okay, we see how those temperatures are going to stack up over the next 7 days. Everywhere in gray on this map is where we do see some frost risks. So you can see this is going to be getting down possibly past Midland, Odessa, maybe down San Angelo. I mean, pretty far down here in the south of Texas. But some of the mid-south and even pockets of kind of forested areas in the southeast could possibly get maybe their first frost of the year as well out of this pattern. But wind is going to be the interesting piece to this. We do expect today, look at the winds that are expected to be today and tomorrow, really mostly today here in the central and southern plains moving toward the Ozarks. 50, maybe 60 mile an hour gusts. That is Melissa. Strong winds coming through parts of Montana. I bet these take you out over the next week or so. Can you see the clipper coming through here? Strong winds, Canadian Prairie, getting into the northern tier of the United States. We then take note that going into late this in the next 7 days, so this will be next Wednesday, Thursday, maybe more Thursday, Friday, another system comes plowing into the western United States. And we see some pretty strong winds, and it's just characteristic of the seasonal transition we're in right now, but just wanted to bring that up. On the precipitation side, our deep trough that's just anchored in the midsection of the country now and slowly moving its way east, it's kind of a very sharp boundary on its northern edge where the lift stops because you're deep inside of the trough here, and we're running out of the moisture to squeeze in the atmosphere. But mainly this is a problem with lift, getting air to rise in this area. So you can kind of see this narrow band right in through here. But to the south, we're looking at some thunderstorms south. We have heavier rains moving through. And as we just take a look at one of our models, the high-res NAM, we can kind of play out, where we think this is going to go. So let's just get this queued up for right about now, and we just play it forward, watching parts of the Mid-South, the Ohio Valley, taking on some of that rain, spreading it into one of our drier spots in the country. It's been dry for a while here in pockets of maybe the Mid-Atlantic, but getting back over to the Appalachian Mountains, Ohio, Pennsylvania. This is Thursday morning. We're just going to watch this low work its way up the northeast. Like I said, it's not a fast mover, but it is the main frontal boundary from this that's actually going to help keep Melissa away, as Matt pointed out yesterday. So the low continues to kind of roll pretty far to the north here into parts of the northeast, and it looks like as though the NAM may have had a problem this morning completing, so I'll have to go and investigate that. But that's kind of the main show here over the next 48 hours or so. Bigger picture, it's the position of this trough, honestly. If you look at the upstream pattern, it just seems to be stuck in the Gulf of Alaska, opening a ridge. So this is going to be drier, this is going to be more mild, and we're going to have troughs off to the east, meaning colder and more inclement weather. And then look at the jet stream path just continuing to hammer, maybe getting to the North Sea, but definitely coming through the North Atlantic while we see this more protective ridge going through southern Europe. I don't know how long we get stuck in this pattern. It makes me wonder a bit, by the time we get into December, is this trough still here? Or does it back up maybe? Does the pattern get real long wave, which would drop a deeper trough into the east while keeping the west warm? We're going to look at December at the end of this forecast video, but I'm curious about that. I want to kind of blow it out here, though, as I look at the models. I do want to tell you that this morning's 0Z runs from the GFS and the European, I looked at both of them carefully. They're very tightly aligned, honestly, for the next 2 weeks. They look pretty similar in what they're predicting. So I'm just going to give you one. We're going to look at this whole North American view. Well, we've already discussed this low here and Melissa, so we can see that taking shape through Friday. Now, we know that behind this, as we get into Halloween, there's going to be some colder air that sneaks in. Again, the low is here. The flow around the low does something like that. And there's our little clipper still sneaking through on the backside. Meanwhile, the deep, deep low that is just anchored into the Gulf of Alaska this weekend just continues to send most of its moisture straight into British Columbia. And as I play you through, this is already through 3 days. Let's go on the way through the weekend. We see high pressure sinking into the Midwest. We see storm systems continue to develop over the Gulf of Alaska, hitting British Columbia. And there is, by early next week, another low that's forming down here in parts of the southeast. Now, you know that the southeast is one of these spots that I'm concerned, and Matt's concerned, Andrew's concerned about how far into winter this region makes it and stays dry. And we need to see the drought breakdown there. So to see both models, I'm just going to rock back and forth over next Monday, Tuesday here. Both models developing moisture down here is good. We need this. That low then leaves the east, and it's pretty far out there, but by the 5th, we finally get our first really good push of moisture coming back into the Pacific Northwest. Okay? Now, at that time, the start of November, we are expecting colder weather to spill into this part of the country. So you can start to see the potential maybe for some snow out there. But all in all, if you put it all together and just add up the total precipitation, this is kind of how it shakes out. So we're just playing the high-res European model. We just take this out here through the next 10 days. We've highlighted British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, Northern California. We have the system today. We have the system coming in next week down here. So the east is relatively wet, but there's a huge chunk of the country that's missing this. So yeah, a lot of heavy rain here. Good rain's coming up the East Coast. They need this. We need to break the drought there. But this corridor is dry. This corridor is dry. And if you come out west, you can see there's a huge chunk of the country that's going to have very limited chances, including the Canadian Prairie, very limited chances on getting moisture in place. Snowfall, just a real quick look, because most of the momentum around the base of the big trough in the Gulf of Alaska targets British Columbia. That's where your biggest snows are. So this isn't going to be a big snowmaker for most of the Cascades, save the northern Cascades, and not for most of the Rockies, but here into where Alberta and British Columbia come together. Probability-wise, just take a look at this map, looking at the next 10 days. That shading of color represents who has the highest chance at staying under 1/10 of an inch. And it's a big chunk of the southwest and the plains getting up into the parts of the Canadian Prairie that are missing out on this, on good flow. Southern California is dry, but Florida as well, and even parts of the Great Lakes. Meanwhile, if I jump up to who's really wet in this pattern, I meant to go 1 inch, there you go. We can now see the influence of the current system and the one that's going to follow it here. And then there's the deep trough and its influence, okay? Out there into week 2, okay, let's start you off at day 10. What's familiar? Well, this and this. And as a result, you're going to get flow that comes through the country like that, which means this is going to be mild and this is going to be dry. And so if we go have a look at it, there's the week 2 precipitation patterns. Can you see the dryer? It's in most of the models here. But we're wet in the northwest in all 4 forecast models. So drier, I like the CPC map. It makes quite a bit of sense to me. There's drier in this region, wetter to the north where the jet can still attack the country. Going out beyond this, though, we continue to monitor this north versus south setup. We do not anticipate early, because of La Nina, any sort of subtropical jet coming through. And that would guarantee moisture for California, the Southwest, Texas. Sun Belt through Cotton Belt. That's what you'd end up getting in through this area. And instead, we kind of split the country here, with a much more favorable storm track north. And that's why there's near normal precipitation, even wetter on the Great Lakes. Now, the European model versus the GFS, they have different solutions. The GFS continues to be a much, much drier model. And we have gone on and on about this risk in this area of being drier, which is why right now to finish October, I'm pretty happy there's a system rolling through here, and we're looking next week at another one. But when you get out there into November, boy, the models are really just pulling back on the chances for rainfall in this area. Okay, temperature-wise, here's today's max temperatures. As we go into Thursday and Friday, nice warm up in the west. Cold Halloween for a lot of folks in through here. In fact, the minimum temperatures, let's go look at those real quick. The minimum temperatures on Friday morning, take a look. And then on Saturday morning, that's pretty chilly air. So just make sure the kids are prepared for that as they go out. Very cold morning on Saturday morning down here in Florida. Back to those maximum temperatures, though. So this would be Saturday, November the 1st. Warm west, cold east. Got a big warm up coming for the plains, downslope winds, big ridge, compressional warming. You're going to get your high temperatures here back in the 70s. And that's where we end up by the November the 4th. The models are pretty convinced that this ridge placement, which builds in here and then gets there by, the 3rd through the 8th, is going to dominate things, keeping normal to cooler normal east. And you can even see it out there at day 10. And the models all kind of get that. They're all kind of doing that same thing for the next 15 days. So that long wave, deep trough Gulf of Alaska, deep trough North Atlantic seems to be dominating our pattern across the United States. Now here's what's interesting. We've made a case that 2024 is a possible analog. Certain things about 2024 look similar. So I want to remind you what the temperature profile last year looked like. It was actually warm in November east and colder in November west. And if you can't remember, the precipitation pattern was drought breaking here. We really broke a crazy drought, really honed in on parts of Oklahoma. And we saw multiple onshore flow events that just delivered tremendous snows into pockets of the Pacific Northwest starting in Northern California. Well, what did the jet stream do last last November. Well, we had an extension, and there was a bit of subtropical jet. Now that was part of it. So the flow was coming in like this and then diving like that, and it met up with a little bit of flow, which is not characteristic of a La Nina. But the more dominant feature was the deep lows that just hung along the west coast. So you just got flow that came around, supported a little bit by some subtropical flow. There was a little bit of ridging east, which is what kept it warm, but it kept the Gulf open. And that's why we hit this area with a lot of moisture and hit this area with a lot of moisture. That was the pattern, okay? Now, we've made a case that, gosh, you look at the ocean temperatures a year ago on October 28th, and look at them this year. There is a lot of similarities. There is one big difference, though, this year that we're going to have to build a better story around. And I think it's how strong the Indian Ocean dipole is. Think of it as an El Nino-La Nina circulation in the Indian Ocean, okay? It's very negative right now, and it's sending strong winds in this direction. Now, I bring that up because when I look out there and try to make a case for what could happen if 2024 is an analog, well, we got into December and looked like this. We were back flipped around, mild west and cooler east. And as I think about it, some of the models are attempting to take us from here and here over the next 2 weeks, right? We talked about that, to later in December, after what could be, I think, a more mild November, do this. Matt mentioned it yesterday. Ridge west and trough east. And if that's the case, yeah, the west will have a warmer December, at least start to it, and the east will have colder. Is that a possibility? Absolutely. But I want to know, is the MJO going to do its thing, right? I mean, is it going to actually, come way and just sweep around over here to phases and 7, 8, or is it going to fail? You got to remember that about, I don't know what it is, I think it's 40% of the time that the MJO sweeps through phase 3, 4, 5, maybe touches 6, and then dies. It's rare that it makes the complete turn all the way through phase 7 and 8. And if it gets stuck in phase 7 as we finish November, yeah, this will be more mild west and more Arctic shots east. In fact, if it looked like this is a whole lot of Miller B storm systems, which turn into nor'easters after going through the Ohio Valley. So I'm just making a case here for what could be, but I want to remind you that the models are doing something like, well, gosh, I think the GFS is too far out. They're doing something like this for the month of November. And if we just come back to it, this is what last November looked like. It was way different. So maybe we shouldn't be, I shouldn't be so hung up on 2024, despite the similarities, there it is, in the ocean temperatures. Look at that. Very similar. Maybe it is this Indian Ocean dipole that's giving it enough of a push away from that. Or maybe it's the fact that the North Pacific is cooling so much that's driving these different forecasts. I just want to give you some ideas as we work our way through the end of a month and wait on some new long-range forecast data, which will come at the beginning of the month. I'm not real set on any strong analogs. I did get asked yesterday about 2005. I was up in Montana, and a guy up there asked me about it. I'll dig into that later this week, but right now I just want to finish out with South America. If we look at the rainfall here, let's get this playing. Maybe we got to refresh it here. If we look at the rainfall, there we go. We got a front trapped here. We can see, watch this kind of explosion of convection over Mato Grosso right there. There's been some moisture that's been able to get into parts of South America. Over the next 10 days, the GFS and the European, they have a similar look. And what it suggests is this region is wetter, while parts of Argentina, maybe even Rio Grande do Sul and Uruguay, are drier. We can see that Mato Grosso is expecting near normal rains. But the models, when you look at it week 2, are just different. Like the GFS is like, all right, I think it's going to be wetter here, but drier much further into the interior, bordering on the Amazon. And the European model is like, no, it's going to rain. It's going to rain a lot. And question will be, when we get into Friday, is how's planting progress going? What's the quality of this crop look like? When I get you some NDVI data, I will. But as it stands, we're just going to keep watching these forecast models and seeing how they're playing out with total precipitation. I do want to remind you that with La Nina, okay, every model is going to go over drier southern Brazil into northern Argentina. And that's what the new November, December, January forecast looks like for that region based off the multi-model probability forecast system out of Columbia University. So there we go. That's what I wanted to cover for you today. Matt will pick it up again tomorrow. Hope he's feeling better. And then I will finish off the week on Friday. So take care. We'll talk then. Thanks.